This happened when I was 17, making the drive from my hometown to my new university. I had packed up everything in my old, inexpensive SUV, everything from clothes to books, and was heading off for my first solo road trip. It also marked the first time I'd be away from my family for an extended period, so naturally, I was feeling a bit anxious. The journey was about 600 miles in total, so I planned to split it into 2 days of driving. The map said I'd reach my hotel around 11 p.m., but with potential delays from traffic, gas stops, and food breaks, I knew it would likely be later than that. By 7 p.m., the sun had set, and the roads were mostly empty. Every now and then, a car would pass me, their headlights disappearing into the distance. For most of the trip, though, I was on my own. The quiet and isolation made me feel incredibly drained, so around 10 p.m., I decided to stop at the next gas station before I made the final stretch. 10 minutes later, I pulled off the road and into a gas station. It was completely isolated. There were no nearby towns or signs of life, just the gas station, a few pumps, and a tiny convenience store. I didn't see any cars in the lot, and the only lights came from the station itself. After filling up, I was startled when a man appeared out of nowhere. He looked much older than me, probably in his 50s, and his disheveled appearance suggested he had been living rough. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It made me feel uneasy. "Do you need something?" I asked, hoping he wouldn't come any closer. He stopped a few feet away, glancing around cautiously before he said, "Take the exit back onto the highway." I was confused and didn't quite understand. He pointed behind me at the exit I had just passed and repeated, "Take the exit back onto the highway." After a brief pause, I just nodded, even though it didn't make sense. The exit he wanted me to take was a one-way road, so if I followed his instructions, I'd be driving on the wrong side and have to make a U-turn. It didn't add up. I looked at the ramp I was supposed to take. It seemed completely clear, no signs of construction or anything blocking it. As I finished up, I glanced back at the man, who was now sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it, the stranger the whole situation seemed. I began to wonder if this was some kind of trap. Trusting my instincts, I decided to leave the gas station, heading toward the entrance to the highway. But as I merged onto the highway, I noticed something strange. Most of the streetlights were out. I slowed down, assuming it was some sort of construction zone. But as I focused on the road ahead, something caught my eye. Just a vague shape to my left. Suddenly, a pickup truck appeared out of nowhere and stopped right in front of me. The doors swung open, and 4 men jumped out, brandishing various weapons: metal bats, machetes, and knives. They weren't even trying to hide their faces, and they had this cold, emotionless look on their faces, like they didn't care about what they were doing. I quickly put my car in reverse, backing up as fast as I could, but just as I was pulling away, I saw outlines of several more people emerging from the shadows on the side of the road. A few even started running after my car, and I quickly sped off, not looking back until I felt I was a safe distance away. I called 911 once I thought I was out of danger, but to my surprise, I never received a follow-up call or any updates about the situation. It was almost as if they didn't bother checking. Looking back, I think the man at the gas station was trying to warn me, maybe even keep me from getting involved in something dangerous. Whatever the case, I'm incredibly lucky to have gotten out of that alive, and to this day, I still have no idea what those people were planning. It was a typical Friday evening after my classes ended, and I was out doing deliveries for a side job. This was my usual routine, making deliveries on weekends to cover my living expenses while at college. The night started off strong, with plenty of orders coming in and my earnings steadily climbing. However, after the dinner rush, things slowed down considerably. Orders were scarce, and the ones that did come in were low-paying, essentially a waste of time. After an hour of aimless driving, an order popped up that seemed promising. It was a bit of a drive, about 8 miles, but the payout was fair. Not great, but definitely better than the lowball offers I'd been getting. I accepted the order and walked into the restaurant to grab the food. With the bag in hand, I jumped in my car and started driving. The map showed it would take me about 30 minutes to get there, which was the longest distance I'd driven for a delivery so far. Most of the houses in the area were fairly close to campus, but this one was much farther out. After about 20 minutes, the scenery changed dramatically. There were fewer houses, and I was driving past vast stretches of farmland with nothing else around. The road became more desolate as I made my way down it. The last leg of the drive was along an isolated dirt road that wound through a farm field. Eventually, I arrived at the house. It was a small, dilapidated home tucked far back from the main road. The driveway, which was made of dirt, stretched through the field. As I drove deeper into the property, I started to feel a sense of unease. There was something off about the whole situation, even though I'm usually not easily spooked. The sound of my tires rumbling on the dirt was the only noise I could hear. I parked in front of the house, leaving the engine running. The night was still and quiet, and the house itself looked almost abandoned. The only light was coming from the porch, faintly illuminating the area around it. I grabbed the bag of food and got out of the car, making my way up to the porch through overgrown grass. I knocked on the door, glancing back at my car sitting alone in the dark, with nothing but fields behind it. I waited a moment, then knocked again. Still no answer. The house was eerily silent, and I began to feel something wasn't right. The porch light, though on, seemed out of place. Upon closer inspection, I noticed it was a solar-powered light, one that didn't require anyone to be present to function. That meant the house likely hadn't been occupied in a while. As I stood there, piecing it all together, I heard the sound of an engine. Turning around, I saw headlights approaching on the dirt road behind me. A car pulled up and stopped right behind mine. A man stepped out and stood by his vehicle, not saying a word. My heart raced as I stood frozen, the reality of the situation hitting me. The quiet of the night only made things worse. I was alone in the middle of nowhere with no one around to help. In a split second, I made a snap decision. Without thinking, I dropped the food bag and bolted from the porch, running behind the house and into the field. I glanced back, seeing the man beginning to follow me, and I pushed myself harder, weaving through the tall grass. As I ran, the grass grew thicker until it was nearly impossible to see anything in any direction. I knew by then I had gained enough distance that he couldn't catch me. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath, and moved carefully through the crops, staying as quiet as possible in case the man was still looking for me. Eventually, I reached another property and found a road where I had enough signal to call for help. The police arrived, and we went back to check on my car. The man was long gone, but surprisingly, my car hadn't been touched. The food bag, however, was still sitting on the porch of the house. It was clear now, this wasn't just a robbery. The man had come there for something much more sinister. This happened to me about a year ago when I worked at a 24-hour convenience store. It's a job many people think is uneventful, but that night turned out to be different. The rain wasn't too heavy, but enough to make it uncomfortable to be outside. Since it was a slow night, there weren't many customers coming in to buy snacks or fuel up. My main task was just to be there, making sure everything was in order. I'd walk around a bit to stay awake, but most of the time I was just scrolling through social media on my phone. Out of nowhere, I heard a tapping sound from outside. I looked up and saw a figure standing at the glass door. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood. I waved at him, signaling that the door was open, but he kept tapping as if he didn't notice. I walked over, opened the door, and greeted him. Without acknowledging me, he walked past and headed straight for the counter. It struck me as odd how unaware he seemed. I returned to the counter and he asked for a pack of cigarettes, paying with cash. He left, and as I glanced out the window, I noticed something strange. There were no cars in the lot or near the gas pumps. The man continued walking down the road, heading straight into the rain like it was no big deal. I found myself puzzled. If his car had broken down, I would have expected him to buy gas or ask for help, but he didn't. He just left with a pack of cigarettes, and that was it. The next hour was uneventful, but the encounter still lingered in my mind. I was in the middle of restocking when I heard another tap on the door. I walked over to find the same man standing outside. I opened the door and asked if he was okay. He didn't answer, but instead pointed down the road. "Down the road," he said. I squinted into the distance but saw nothing. Then my gaze fell on a gas can by one of the pumps. He pointed to it and said, "Help." It clicked that he might not speak much English. I agreed to help and walked over to the pump with him. He handed me a credit card, and I began filling the gas can. He stood behind me, staying out of sight, which made me uneasy. Once the can was full, I handed it to him. But before I could go back inside, he grabbed my arm and started speaking in a hurry. I tried pulling away, but just then, I heard a noise from inside. I looked through the door and saw a man inside the store, hurriedly stuffing things into his backpack. The moment he saw me, he jumped over the counter. Everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying on the floor with a pounding headache. It felt like just a few minutes had passed. I realized the man behind me must have hit me to help his accomplice escape. The cops were called, and they took me to the hospital. Fortunately, I only had a concussion and a few stitches. The worst part was the feeling of embarrassment, like I had let them pull one over on me so easily. Looking back, I'm glad I blacked out when I did. The CCTV footage revealed that the man inside had a gun. If I'd tried to stop him or even made a move to confront him, things could have ended much worse. Sometime last year, I spent an entire day and night stuck inside my house. A massive storm hit my city, forcing everyone indoors for nearly 24 hours. Streets and houses flooded, and the news reported strong winds shattering windows and ripping roofs apart. I was alone, passing the time on my phone, keeping up with the latest updates and listening to the chaos outside. Around 5 or 6 in the evening, the lights started flickering, going off for a few moments before coming back. About an hour later, the power shut off completely. I waited, expecting it to return, but after a while it was clear I'd be without electricity until the storm passed. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone for any updates, when a loud knock suddenly hit the front door. The noise startled me, not just because it was unexpected, but because no one should have been outside in that weather. I hesitated, unsure if I should even check. Maybe it was a neighbor needing help, or asking if my power was out too. It was still strange for anyone to be out there, but eventually I went to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. Maybe I'd waited too long, but something about it didn't feel right. A sense of unease crept over me. I returned to the living room and cracked open a window, letting in what little light I could. With my phone's battery draining and no flashlight available, I just sat there staring into the dark. Then, out of nowhere, I swear I heard a voice. I turned sharply, looking toward the sound, but it was gone. I waited, listening. At first, I thought maybe the wind was playing tricks on me. Then, almost right on cue, I heard it again. A few short words, like someone talking nearby. I moved to another window, peering outside. It was impossible to see much in the rain and darkness. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard for just a second. In that brief moment, I saw someone. A figure stood not far from my house, unmoving. I couldn't tell what they were doing, only that they were there. The darkness swallowed them again just as quickly. Feeling uneasy, I shut the windows and decided to head upstairs. Even as I tried to put it out of my mind, I couldn't shake the thought of the knocking and the person standing outside. The storm raged on, and the night stretched on in silence. Hours passed with nothing happening, just the sound of wind and rain. Then, just when I had almost forgotten about it, I heard something from downstairs. A door opening. My body went rigid. I strained to listen, but the storm outside was too loud. If there were footsteps, I wouldn't have been able to hear them. I sat there, frozen, unable to do anything but wait. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, I grabbed my phone and called 911, knowing it would take time for help to arrive. From the moment I heard the door open to when the police finally showed up, more than 30 minutes had gone by. When they searched the house, they found only an open front door and wet footprints leading inside. No sign of anyone. No indication of what they were looking for. It was as if someone had come in, looked around for a minute, and left. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night.